Welcome back to the Means Report. We know that in the wake of the recent election, you have questions when it comes to our economy, spending cuts, taxes that may or may not end, the debt ceiling, the fiscal cliff. What does it all mean as we continue to get ready for 2013 and beyond? Here's Jeff Ferhman.
It's great to be back with you guys today. Since we've gotten past the lengthy election cycle, seems like it's gone on an extremely long time. So we got past the elections. Now the question is, what do we do now with our finances, and what are the big issues of today? So let's talk about the big issue that you've probably heard a lot about, which is the fiscal cliff. The fiscal cliff really has a couple different components to it, and let's touch on each of those today. The fiscal cliff, the reason it's so important is there's some cuts that are going to happen and then some taxes that could come into play. That takes money out of circulation. So with all those things potentially happening, if that happened, the bad news is it could actually push our economy back into recession. It takes about 3% of growth out of the U.S. economy. We've been growing the last year or so at about 1 to 2%. So we take out 3 out of our 2, obviously we're negative. So that's the potential issue. We don't think that's going to happen, and I'll tell you why. But let's talk about each component of the fiscal cliff. The first component are spending cuts. The primary spending cuts come from the last debt ceiling debate that happened. What happened in that debt ceiling debate, if you recall back, is they raised the debt ceiling for the U.S., and along with that, they agreed to cut spending automatically if they didn't determine some discretionary spending. That spending cut comes from defense spending and then some non-discretionary other spending items, but defense is the big piece. Obviously, that's something that's going to be talked about. That will take money out of defense spending and obviously money that would go to companies that are producing items for defense. Along with that, ironically, is another debt ceiling debate. What also needs to happen is they're not going to be able to cut spending and or raise taxes enough to cover the spending of the government. So the debt ceiling is going to have to be pushed up temporarily, at least a bit as well. The big piece of this, though, those two I think will be settled. The big piece is the tax piece, because that's really going to, one of the few times that it's going to hit everybody. So let's talk about each piece of the tax policy. There's been a lot talked about the Bush tax cuts and basically letting that expire. If the Bush tax cuts expire, it is primarily going to raise taxes on the higher income earners. So that's been a big political football. The concern out there with that is if you tax high income earners that own businesses, do they forego hiring and things of that nature that affects all of us? So those tax cuts affect income, but also affects a lot of us that also own stocks, bonds. It will affect dividend taxes and or capital gains going up. So even a lot of middle income Americans have capital gains taxes. So that's a big piece. Another one that affects everybody in their working years is payroll taxes. A few years ago, they actually took 2% lowered payroll taxes. One of the things that will come back is payroll taxes increasing back to the average, which we actually think will happen because it's got to catch back up for Social Security. So that's going to affect everybody that gets a paycheck. Basically, your payroll tax is going to go up 2%. It effectively, again, reverts back to where we were. Thirdly, which I haven't heard a lot of talk about, is something called alternative minimum tax. Most people aren't real familiar with this. Basically, it's an alternative method of calculating each person's taxation, and the government says we're going to either take your higher of your regular income tax or this alternative minimum tax. Historically, that has tended to hit higher wage earners. If the Bush tax cuts and some other things expire, that alternative minimum tax could hit up to another 30 million middle-class Americans. Again, that's going to be a hot button that we talked about and tried to be fixed before year end. So there are some things that with this tax policy that have been portrayed as only high income earners. There's components to this that affect all of us we're going to want to think about. So the bad news is if everything happens, we have the potential to be recessionary in the first quarter of next year. The good news is we don't think that's going to happen. Politically, that's not good for anybody on either side of the aisle for us to hit another short-term recession. So we think there's some real reasons that they're going to have to try to work together to come together of a compromise to keep us from going into a recession. So that's the good news is there's some political reasons that both sides have some real reasons to work together. What you should be doing, in my opinion, is taking a really hard look at what is your mix. We believe there's going to continue to be some short-term volatility, maybe even longer-term volatility. So take a look over this holiday season and going into the first of the year, which we find a lot of people do anyway, kind of a reevaluation of your situation, and look at, am I comfortable with the mix and what potential upside and downside I have in my portfolio. Hope these tips are helpful and maybe narrowed down a fairly complicated situation simpler. As always, if you have any questions, always feel free to call or email me at the office, and we would be happy to give you further details and more information. Have a great weekend.
Time now for our question of the week. What does it mean to you? And speaking of post-election reaction, we have this question for you. A number of states, including Georgia and South Carolina, have started petitions to secede from the United States in order to form their own government. Do you agree with their secession stance? Why or why not? It's easy to share your thoughts, and you can do that by staying in touch with The Means Report and following us on the social networks, facebook.com/The Means Report or twitter.com/The Means Report. Let us know what you think about the possibility, however remote, of Georgia and South Carolina seceding. You can email us as well. Marlena Wilson is our executive producer and director. Her email address is mwilson@wjbf.com. You can also email me at bmeans@wjbf.com. And as usual, if you want to watch this or any other episode that's aired, you can find those on our website, wjbf.com. Just be sure to type in the keyword Means Report. And as the holiday season approaches, we have lots of great Means Reports coming up for you, including our annual Christmas special. You'll want to stick around for that, and you will also want to stick around for some high-tech ideas when it comes to the holidays. That's coming up on the next edition of the Means Report. So please stay close for that. And Marlena, the Christmas episode actually airs on Christmas Day, correct? In place of our 11 o'clock newscast. So employees get the night off and you get a special edition of the Means Report. So for Levi, Marlena, and the entire Means Report family, take care.